The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, ratified in 1791, states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed." This seemingly simple sentence has been the subject of intense debate for centuries, its interpretation shaping the very fabric of American society. To truly understand the Second Amendment, one must journey back to its origins, to a time when the newly formed nation was grappling with its identity and the specter of tyranny loomed large. In colonial America, gun ownership was a fact of life, intertwined with survival, sustenance, and self-reliance. Yet even then, the seeds of gun control were sown. Laws restricted gun ownership for certain groups, including enslaved Africans and Native Americans, reflecting the social hierarchies of the time. These early regulations underscore a crucial point. The notion of unfettered gun rights is a modern invention, not a historical truth. The Second Amendment itself emerged from the cauldron of the American Revolution. The Founding Fathers, deeply scarred by the experience of British oppression, sought to ensure that the newly formed nation would never again be subjugated by a tyrannical government. The well-regulated militia, composed of armed citizens, was seen as the ultimate safeguard against such a threat. This collective right to bear arms was inextricably linked to the preservation of liberty and the newly won independence. However, the Second Amendment's reference to a well-regulated militia has fueled endless debate over its intended scope. Does it guarantee an individual right to own guns, independent of any militia service? Or does it solely protect the right of states to maintain armed militias for national defense? This fundamental question has reverberated through courtrooms, legislative chambers, and living rooms across the nation, shaping the contours of the gun control debate for generations to come. As America evolved from a fledgling nation to an industrial powerhouse, the nature of firearms and the context surrounding their use underwent a dramatic transformation. The humble muskets of the Revolution, slow to load and limited in firepower, gave way to repeating rifles, handguns, and eventually, to the fearsome firepower of automatic weapons. This technological leap, coupled with rapid urbanization and social upheaval, fueled a growing movement for gun control. The late 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed a surge in violent crime, often linked to the proliferation of handguns. The Wild West, romanticized in popular culture for its gun-slinging outlaws, actually saw many towns implement strict gun control measures, requiring visitors to check their firearms upon arrival. These local ordinances reflected a growing awareness of the dangers posed by readily available firearms in a rapidly changing society. The federal government's foray into gun control began in earnest with the National Firearms Act of 1934. Enacted in response to the gangland violence plaguing the Prohibition era, the law imposed taxes and registration requirements on certain types of firearms, including machine guns and sawed-off shotguns. This landmark legislation marked a turning point, establishing the federal government's authority to regulate firearms in the name of public safety. The Gun Control Act of 1968 further expanded the federal government's role in regulating firearms. Enacted in the wake of the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the law prohibited certain individuals, such as convicted felons and those with mental illness, from purchasing firearms. It also established a licensing system for gun dealers and restricted interstate gun sales. The Gun Control Act of 1968, though controversial, marked a significant step towards a more comprehensive approach to gun control at the federal level. The interpretation of the Second Amendment and its implications for gun control has been a perennial source of controversy in American jurisprudence. The Supreme Court, as the ultimate arbiter of constitutional law, has played a pivotal role in shaping the contours of this debate, issuing landmark rulings that have reverberated through the legal landscape and American society at large. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing interpretation of the Second Amendment, both in legal circles and in the public imagination, centered on the concept of a collective right to bear arms. This view, rooted in the amendment's reference to a well-regulated militia, held that the primary purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure the existence of armed militias, composed of citizens, to protect against tyranny and foreign invasion. Under this interpretation, the right to bear arms was not seen as an individual right, but rather as a collective right tied to the preservation of a free state. However, the late 20th and early 21st centuries witnessed a resurgence of the individual rights interpretation of the Second Amendment. This view, championed by gun rights advocates and gaining traction in legal scholarship, argues that the amendment protects an individual's right to own and use firearms for self-defense, independent of any militia service. This interpretation gained significant ground in 2008 with the landmark Supreme Court case, District of Columbia versus Heller. In Heller, the court struck down a District of Columbia law that effectively banned handgun ownership by most private citizens. This landmark decision, a major victory for gun rights advocates, marked the first time the Supreme Court explicitly recognized an individual's right to possess a firearm, unconnected to militia service for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. The Heller decision, though limited in its scope, had profound implications for the future of gun control in the United States. 2 years later, in McDonald v. City of Chicago, the Supreme Court further solidified the individual right to bear arms, ruling that the Second Amendment applies to state and local governments, not just the federal government. This decision, which incorporated the Second Amendment into the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, struck down a Chicago handgun ban similar to the one overturned in Heller. The McDonald ruling effectively extended the individual right to bear arms nationwide, significantly limiting the ability of state and local governments to enact strict gun control measures. The debate over gun control in the United States is not merely a legal or political one. It is deeply woven into the fabric of American society, reflecting fundamental differences in values, beliefs, and lived experiences. On one side of this chasm stand those who believe in stricter gun control measures as a means to curb gun violence and enhance public safety. They point to the alarming rates of gun-related homicides, suicides, and accidental shootings, arguing that easy access to firearms exacts a devastating toll on American lives. On the other side of the divide stand those who staunchly defend the Second Amendment, viewing any attempt at gun control as an infringement upon a fundamental right. They often cite the need for self-defense, particularly in a society they perceive as increasingly dangerous. Many view gun ownership as a bulwark against tyranny, echoing the sentiments of the Founding Fathers who enshrined the right to bear arms in the Constitution. This ideological divide is exacerbated by the powerful influence of the gun lobby, most notably the National Rifle Association, NRA, which has for decades fiercely opposed gun control measures. The NRA, through its political lobbying efforts and its hold on many lawmakers, has stymied attempts to pass meaningful gun control legislation at both the federal and state levels. Despite the seemingly intractable nature of the gun control debate, there are glimmers of hope. Public opinion polls consistently show broad support for certain gun control measures, such as universal background checks and red flag laws, which allow temporary removal of firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others. The growing movement for gun safety, led by organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, has brought renewed urgency to the issue, particularly in the wake of tragic mass shootings.